Next, we will examine the thyroid gland. The thyroid is a butterfly-shaped gland that wraps around the anterior part of the trachea. It is located just underneath the thyroid cartilage of the larynx and just above the aorta. The gland itself is positioned between the paired common carotid arteries. Microscopically, we see that the thyroid is divided into small spherical structures that are called follicles. Lining the walls of the follicles are the follicular cells. These are the cells that manufacture and secrete thyroid hormone. The center of the follicles are packed with an amber-colored protein that is referred to as colloid. The follicle cells produce and secrete thyroid hormone. This is the body's major metabolic hormone. Nearly every cell in the body has receptors for thyroid hormone, and therefore most body cells are going to be influenced by it and respond to it. The hormone itself comes in two forms, T4 and T3. T4, which is called thyroxine, has 4 iodine atoms attached. Meanwhile, T3, which is called triiodothyronine, has 3 iodine atoms attached. I have started T3 here because T3 is the most active and the most potent form of the hormone. At the tissues, T4 is converted into T3 by enzymes that remove a single iodine atom. So recall that the anterior pituitary controls the thyroid gland, and ultimately it is the hypothalamus that controls the anterior pituitary. The hypothalamus secretes thyrotropin-releasing hormone, which is abbreviated TRH. TRH then stimulates the anterior pituitary to secrete thyroid-stimulating hormone, which is abbreviated TSH, and then TSH will stimulate the thyroid gland to secrete thyroid hormones into the bloodstream. How is thyroid hormone made? The hormone requires 2 important pieces. The first is a protein that's called thyroglobulin, and the second is a mineral called iodine. The follicle cells of the thyroid gland produce the thyroglobulin protein, and then they secrete it into the colloid, and there it is stored until it is needed. Additionally, TSH from the anterior pituitary stimulates the follicle cells to uptake iodine from the bloodstream and store it in the colloid. Iodine is obtained from dietary sources such as seafoods or iodized salts. When thyroid hormones are needed, enzymes that are located in the thyroid gland will attach the iodine to the thyroglobulin. Then after the hormone is assembled, it's secreted into the bloodstream. So this means that the raw components of it, like the iodine and the thyroglobulin, can remain stored in the follicles until they are needed. Thyroid hormone is amino acid based, since the foundation for building the hormone is a protein called thyroglobulin. However, we see that the hormone behaves more like a steroid hormone. First, it is carried in the bloodstream in the same way that steroid-based hormones are carried. Steroid hormones are typically transported by proteins in the bloodstream. So in the case of thyroid hormone, it's transported by thyroxine-binding globulins, which are abbreviated TBGs, that are special proteins found in the blood, which help to transport the hormone. It also functions like a steroid hormone because thyroid hormone has the ability to cross the plasma membrane of the target cells. We also see that the receptors for thyroid hormone are located inside of the cells that it stimulates. It uses the direct gene activation mechanism in order to exert its effects on the target cell in just the same way that steroid hormones do. So since thyroid hormone is the body's major metabolic hormone, it makes sense that increases in thyroid hormone lead to increases in things like basal metabolic rate as well as heat production. The increase in heat production is referred to as the calorogenic effect, and the heat comes from the mitochondria, which mitochondria increase their use of both oxygen and glucose in order to make ATP energy, and in doing so they also create more heat energy as well. Thyroid hormone also promotes tissue growth and has strong developmental effects, making it an anabolic hormone because anabolic hormones are hormones that promote tissue building. The major effects of thyroid hormone, as mentioned earlier, is that they control basal metabolic rate, which is abbreviated BMR, as well as controlling heat production. So increased secretion of thyroid hormone, which is referred to as hypersecretion, will increase both basal metabolic rate and heat production. Meanwhile, decreased secretion, which is referred to as hyposecretion, will lower basal metabolic rates as well as heat production. Of course, it also influences tissue growth and maintenance by controlling glucose and lipid breakdown, which are also called glucose catabolism and lipid catabolism. One of the major effects is that it breaks down adipose tissue into fatty acids, and then these fatty acids are put into the bloodstream in order to be used as a source of fuel. It also controls protein synthesis in order to promote cell growth and tissue growth. A quick scan of the other functions of thyroid hormone, and we see that in places like the nervous system, it is critical in promoting normal development of, in particular, the fetal and infant nervous systems, and in adults it helps to promote normal nervous system functioning. In the cardiovascular system, it is important in maintaining proper heart rate as well as proper blood pressure. And thyroid hormone also promotes normal development of the skeleton as well as the muscular system. And finally, in the female reproductive system, it promotes normal reproductive ability as well as lactation. So now let's examine what happens when things go wrong with the thyroid gland. We'll begin with a condition that's called Hashimoto's disease. This disease is an autoimmune condition in which the immune system attacks and destroys the thyroid gland. In particular, it targets and destroys the follicular cells. So when the follicular cells are killed, this limits the ability of the thyroid gland to produce and secrete thyroid hormone, which causes severe hypothyroidism, which is also referred to as myxedema. So as you might expect, reduced or lowered secretion of thyroid hormones lead to low basal metabolic rates as well as low body temperatures, which cause chills. Since we see that normal thyroid hormone helps to maintain normal body temperature and a typical basal metabolic rate. Hypothyroidism also causes edema, that is fluid accumulation in the tissues, as well as dry skin and puffy eyes. When thyroid hormone cannot be made properly due to low levels of iodine, this causes another type of hypothyroidism. Specifically, this type is referred to as iodine deficiency hypothyroidism. Since the thyroid gland does not have enough iodine to build the hormone, this results in a reduced secretion of thyroid hormone. In response to detecting low levels of thyroid hormone in the blood, the anterior pituitary increases its secretion of TSH. Because the anterior pituitary doesn't know that thyroid hormone is being made incorrectly, all it can detect is that the thyroid levels in the blood are low, and so the anterior pituitary responds accordingly to that. When thyroid stimulating hormone levels in the blood start to accumulate as a result of increased release from the anterior pituitary, the thyroid will increase its production of the thyroglobulin protein. But because the hormone cannot be made in high quantities when iodine is low, the thyroglobulin will start to accumulate in the follicles, and this causes the thyroid gland to enlarge. And this enlargement is referred to as a goiter. Just like with Hashimoto's disease, iodine deficiency hypothyroidism is going to result in low amounts of thyroid hormone being secreted into the bloodstream. Reduced secretion, recall, is referred to as hyposecretion. When low amounts are secreted, this results in a lowered basal metabolic rate, as well as decreased body temperature, increased weight gain as a result of lower basal metabolic rates, as well as edema and fluid accumulation in the tissues. So now let's examine what happens when the thyroid releases too much thyroid hormone. This is referred to as hyperthyroidism. And these are conditions that increase the secretion of thyroid hormones from the gland. One that we will specifically investigate here is called Graves' disease, and this disease is a condition in which the immune system produces abnormal antibodies that attack the thyroid gland. These abnormal antibodies cause the immune system to kill the follicular cells, but at the same time, the antibodies also mimic the effects of thyroid stimulating hormone, which is normally a hormone that is secreted from the anterior pituitary. So in response to the antibodies appearing as though they are TSH, the thyroid gland responds to those abnormal antibodies in the same way that it would respond to an increase in TSH. which would stimulate the thyroid gland to increase its release of thyroid hormones. Symptoms of Graves' disease are exactly what you would expect from increased secretion of thyroid hormones. We see increased basal metabolic rates, increased body temperatures, which results in sweating. It also has cardiovascular effects in that it will increase heart rate. It will also have nervous system effects in that the overactive nervous system will make the person anxious or nervous. Weight loss can also result from increased basal metabolic rate because the body is going to be burning more calories at rest, which is going to result in increased breakdown of things like fats and proteins that the body is going to use as a source of fuel. An additional symptom is that the eyes begin to bulge, which is a condition called exophthalmos. With this condition, we see that the tissues, in particular the connective tissues that are behind the eyes, begin to accumulate fluid, which is called edema, and this is what causes the eyes to bulge. Before we conclude with our examination of the thyroid gland, we have to take a look at another population of cells that is also located within the gland, and these cells are called the parafollicular cells because they are located adjacent to the follicles that produce and secrete thyroid hormones. The parafollicular cells produce and secrete a hormone that's called calcitonin, which is released into the bloodstream when calcium levels in the blood are elevated. The hormone calcitonin slows the breakdown of bone tissue and also helps to remove some of the excess calcium from the bloodstream. It slows the breakdown of bone tissue because that will prevent blood calcium from rising even more, because recall that this hormone is secreted when blood calcium is also elevated, so we don't want the blood calcium to become even more elevated if the skeleton minerals are being broken down and the calcium from those minerals is being put into the bloodstream. We see that it also stimulates cells called osteoblasts within the bones to build minerals, bone minerals. So these cells will use some of that calcium from the bloodstream to build new bone tissue minerals.